Thank you, Professor Willy Semmler, Samuel Owusu, and Ibrahim Tari for inviting to this exciting event at the New School. So I would like to share today some thoughts on bringing nature into economics. And this is this idea about natural resources and climate wealth of nations in national and international accounting. And I want to start by giving a historic example. So already once after a big pandemic in the 14th century, the Great Plague, the Renaissance bloomed, and allegedly there are historical papers that say that the economic boom and bringing finance into the service of people, when we think of the Florence city-state investments of the Italian Medici in arts for the people, or also social equity ideas of the German Fugger banking house, who provided social housing opportunities, but also great expeditions of the Spanish crown. All of this contributed to a flourishing growth, and behind it was finance in the service of people. So now there is also in the literature, we find that the post-COVID world is meant to be a great reset, and finance again should be in the service of people. We see this with the Green New Deal, that is a funding strategy in the US of 7 to up to 93 trillion US dollars. That's President Joseph Biden's economic program that targets climate change and tries to alleviate inequality. On the European side, we see European Green Deal, a similar concept that's funded by 1.8 trillion euro. And we already have the Sustainable Finance Taxonomy, which is a measurement of the ecological impact of industries on the world and society. And then on the international account, we see, first of all, transition funds into areas that will be hit harder by climate change. And there are also the conferences of the parties of the United Nations, the COP agreements, also go more and more into opening up aggregate macroeconomic functions and lifting more who has or different impacts of climate change around the world. And then we also have this idea of the global Green New Deal. So all countries should be potentially enact a taxation and bond strategy. And Professor Semmler is really the expert on this, has been doing this for more than a decade by now, thinking about redistribution via taxation and climate bonds, for instance. And then, of course, we also have the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So what all these programs unites is this idea that finance should be more in the service of people and should imbue meaning into society. In the US, and this is a training that I received in the last year, there's currently this idea of the US White House to bring nature into economics and have nature inclusive accounting. So integrate natural resources into national accounting. So account for land, water, minerals, plants, and animals. And we have to say that the Environmental Protection Agency of the US is also the first agency in the world that started putting a price tag on natural resources in its foundation. And now the US is thinking about nature's role in driving economic growth, and also thinking about future discounting under climate change and resource depletion. What we also see is this strategy to find statistics to capture environmental and economic decisions. And this is on the one hand on the federal level, where we see in the US the attempt to bring nature into capital accounting and into competitive measurement. But we also see resilience more on the state and local level, and conservation really where in the local community conservation should be happening. And we can say this is a large-scale project in the US. We have 27 US federal departments and agencies involved. And the US White House Office of Science and Technology, for instance, is one of the flagship agencies that pushes for this nature and economics trend, but also the Office of Management Budget and the US Department of Commerce are thinking about the international measurement of nature in economics. In Europe, we have this European Green Deal and the Sustainable Finance Taxonomy that targets at classifying economic activities contributing to environmental objectives. And that all should help a market transition to sustainable finance, especially the ESG ratings that are also pushed in the US by Gary Gensler at the Securities and Exchange Commission. Also should focus more on transparency, clarity, integrity. So this is to help greenwashing attempts to really make the taxonomy very transparent and have investment standards and investment tools that are easily understandable for the market. And all of this should lead into financing more sustainable growth. Where we have it in international accounting, nature is this attempt of the World Bank. They have a project on changing wealth of nations, and they have a report which recently came out. And the new idea is now here. You see how and this is a chart that I borrowed from the leader Stephanie Onder at the World Bank Changing Wealth of Nations project. This is open accessible information, and the new measurement here, you see all the measurement that has been contributing to international accounting of the wealth of nations so far, and the red ones are the new areas. So there's this carbon storage addition, renewable energy, but also aquaculture are new in the newest report. So we see also on the international accounting level, nature encroaches macro dynamics and macroeconomics. Another attempt is here from the International Monetary Fund, and Professor Semmler in his climate change project hosted actually one of the key figures and leaders on this attempt is the idea to see a disparate impact of climate change. And here's this chart that I borrowed from the International Monetary Fund blog that talks about the unequal burden of rising temperatures, especially on low-income countries. And you see this visualization, the countries that will be hit the hardest and the most effective by climate change are colored in red and are also enlarged if the effect and impact is huge. What I did, and this is why I love coming back to the new school here for presentations. This is pretty much my dissertation. I calculated the macroeconomic disparate impact of climate change, and all of this showing the differences of climate change impacts around the world. I only do in order to alleviate the consequences by redistribution mechanisms. And so I take in the country temperature differences around the world. We all agree that Canada is cooler than Mexico. The GDP compositions per country, agriculture, service, and industry sector productivity varies by country. And you find in the literature the top temperature for productivity by GDP sector. And when you factor these three components together, you get this disparate impact of climate change around the world. And you can measure when is the actual best temperature condition for countries around the world. And here we see the greener the country, the more the country has time ahead. And the red countries will be the countries that will have run out of favorable productivity temperature the fastest and around the world. I also the idea of these changes around the peak condition of temperature. I also did 3 different models because it's not so clear if it's a linear change, if it's a prospect change. So concave and convex losses and gains, or if it's an exponential change. So I factor all three together and then take the mean in order to get this model. And then also interestingly, once a year, I have all the countries plotted together. And on the left bar chart, you see 1/3 of the countries in green that have the most time ahead, and 1/3 of the countries that have the least time ahead in red, and in the middle is the yellow bar. But when I only look at 1/3 of the gains, this green bar shifts up, meaning that only a few countries will be winning the most. And the unfairness in this is, or I expect to have a GDP prospect rising prospect. And the unfairness is that we also see already now in greenhouse gas emissions, self-reported, that the countries that are emitting more CO2 are also the countries that are more on the winning side. And we also see by now also already climate-induced migration patterns and financial inflows into these countries that are expected to gain from climate change, which all leads to this huge disparate impact effect of climate change around the world that also echoes in other economic correlates. And I only do all of this in order to show ways how to redistribute some of the expected economic gains into areas that are losing out the fastest and the most. And here you see this is grounded, and this is very new school style, grounded in philosophical ideas of Immanuel Kant. You can make the argument that there is this climatorial imperative that you should not evaluate if you're on the winning or on the losing side, but refrain from an action that could do hurt to you as well. Hans Jonas also applied Immanuel Kant's ideas on the environment. We also see John Rawls' veil of ignorance. You should evaluate every ethical predicament behind the veil of ignorance without knowing whether or not you will be a beneficiary or a loser. And then also at the New School, Dimitri Nikolin at the philosophy department also applies these unfairness issues of climate change to philosophical conclusions. We also see that there is this responsibility to act. And I then started thinking about how to transfer some of the expected gains into losing areas. And here we have the GDP growth per inhabitant, the expected. We see the greener the country, the more the country has time ahead, and therefore the country should be redistributing into some of the red areas. And then I also calculated different ways how to redistribute these gains and losses. I'm sparing you all the details, but I factor in the geo impact of climate change, the resilience finance opportunities of countries around the world. So how much has a country in the past been able to tap into financial means in order to brace economic shocks? And also finance diplomacy, so different angles, how much the country could lead on a common solution like a green taxation bond strategy, or a global Green New Deal by integrating, for instance, science diplomacy means, because scientists can often transport ideas easier than politically tainted diplomats. But also I factor in also economic correlates like the economic connectivity of countries that would have then a higher responsibility to protect the world, because they are kind of leaders who take in and take out goods, services, financial means easier than other countries. And I also, and this is really thanks to the New School, I presented this at an earlier stage, and someone said you have to also factor out the consumption-based trade adjusted CO2 emissions. So you also have to factor in who's really consuming goods that are sometimes produced by countries that are credited with high CO2 emissions, but they are actually exporting the goods, and the goods are consumed somewhere else. So we also have to include this in order to really give justice to the climate redistribution model here. Where the project currently stands. So in a previous version, I also then started really thinking about the peak temperature conditions, agriculture, service and industry sector. So agriculture, the good news is we have not, we are quite far ahead or far from the peak condition for agriculture productivity around the world. So we do have time ahead. Just the agriculture will likely shift to a higher level, so we will grow different crops, or land will become arable that was covered in ice. We see also industry changes, for instance, water. Oh no, this is a service sector change, but in the industry, we can say we are currently living in the switch from heating devices being replaced by more cooling devices. So if you want to invest in a technology that has the future prospect of being rising, I would rather recommend you cooling devices than heating devices. And in the service sector, we see currently we are living in a time where water is becoming more and more scarce. And this is also due to the fact that we are, or if you sum it up over the entire world, we live in a time where water becomes harder and harder to be preserved, because when it gets hotter, the water, bacteria is also growing and procreating in the water easier, and that makes clean water very or harder to be maintained and conserved. And then lastly, and this is really my last slide, where this now stands, I also previously had pricing mechanisms. So these are old graphs about pricing of crops, cereals, and beverages. We see here since the 2008 world financial recession, there's actually a rise or an elevated price for cereals and beverages, which is problematic when you think of that there are some countries, especially very poor countries, where people have to use all their wages for food intake. And if the prices rise, of course, the cost of living in these countries constrained people even more. So the idea would be here to really make a stylized model, integrate also scarcity, and show over time how different impact factors are having an influence on beverages and cereal prices, and thereby think really about the scarcity effect, and if we can extrapolate something into the future, or if we can forecast something, or if we can see what moves market price of commodities and beverages. And then also one of my projects is currently also looking, and this is a nice intro to the next presentation that I really look forward to enjoying. I look into the US conventional retail of gasoline prices. So did gasoline get or does it have an elevated price since the Ukraine crisis? And this is a stark example how politics around the world actually can have an impact on gasoline prices. And with gasoline prices, a lot follows. Food production is also dependent on gasoline prices. So there's this expectation that also food prices have risen in the US since the political turmoil in the Ukraine. So this will be integrated in an upcoming book. And I very much look forward to also learn from your expertise in political economy, also derive maybe also from the history of economics, nice examples, or give feedback on the methods and the data used. I always enjoy presenting at Professor Semmler's workshop because the comments really push me forward and give really excellent feedback how to move the model forward. With this, I very much look forward to your questions and comments, and of course to the following presentations.